YouTube Ozick Owen, the Godows is back with head coaching candidates for the 2024 offseason. Perfect timing for this because there's some job openings, and Brandon Staley just got fired this morning after that beatdown last night. So I'm going to put them in the tiers. Most likely to get hired. We'll have some way too early, just a couple way too early predictions at the end as well. We did this video last year, and the top candidates ended up getting hired for the most part. So excited about it. Like, subscribe to notifications on. Check out our other content. We have weekly coverage, picks, power rankings, a lot more. Recent mock draft up on the channel. Check it all out. You will not be disappointed. Follow us on Twitter. Check out our sponsors, Liquid IV, GLD Shop, code GOAT, links pinned in the comments. So we're going to start with most likely to get hired, in my opinion. There's other very likely candidates next we'll talk about, but Ben Johnson, who is an offensive-minded coach, offense coordinator of the Detroit Lions, and maybe his stock is going down a little bit because the Lions are struggling right now. There's too much of that playing for fourth down. Like on third down, let's not try to get the first down. Let's play for a closer fourth down because we're going to go for it. And it looked good at first, and now it's kind of catching on. Teams are figuring that out. But I think teams are more so figuring out Jared Goff, and maybe they're getting limited, and maybe just more. They're not one-dimensional, but more run-heavy. So not really all on Ben Johnson. I think, I know he was a serious candidate last offseason, and he wanted to go back to Detroit. Could he go back to Detroit again? It's a possibility. I think teams have it in their minds that he is one of the top candidates still. So I expect him to be hired. I think he thought, which I think he was right, going back to the Lions at a young age, rather than going to the Panthers, for an example, I think he thought it was a better choice, and it feels like the better choice. Bobby Slowick, offense coordinator for the Texans, has that Shanahan background, coming from the 49ers, and it's looked pretty good with the Houston Texans. CJ Stroud is historic rookie season for him. So being able to recognize, evaluate the talent, but develop it, pretty good playbook. Again, that 49ers, Kyle Shanahan background, it's a pretty good look. Another young coach. A lot of these teams looking to go and rebuild. I don't think you need to go and rebuild to hire one of these young coaches, but I think that's kind of like a bonus. Like if you're going to rebuild, get a younger coach. You don't want one of those old school guys. It doesn't really fit, if you're in rebuild these days. So two offensive guys at the top, and then we have Mike Macdonald, defensive coordinator, former Michigan defensive coordinator a couple years ago, now with the Ravens. And they move on from, a couple years ago, a really good defense coordinator in Don Wink Martindale, which was a little surprising, but he is like stuck in his ways, and it's kind of working. He's good. He was good with the Ravens, good with the Giants, but they wanted to kind of change it up a little bit, broaden their horizons, mix it up when it comes to how the defense is called, what type of defense is called, what coverages, the mix up in coverages. So they bring in McDonald, and it worked right away. And the Ravens are, interesting because I feel like they're really good on paper. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like they play better than how they look on paper. Like, because they don't have that elite defensive front anymore. Maybe they're a little thin on edge rushers as well. They got strong secondary, strong linebackers, but I think McDonald gets the most out of them, a good young coach. So it's a guy that can get a good opportunity. Antonio Pierce, you got to put up here because he's a strong head coaching candidate for the Las Vegas Raiders to keep that job. So I think you put him in the most likely category. If he doesn't get that job, I think other teams will strongly consider him because he's a good hype man. He's a good leader. The team feels well prepared for the most part. I mean, for a fresh off last night, them scoring 63 points, I think players want to play for him. So I think that's like the team's like not sure who to hire. Like, hey, we want to get good players. So I think we can get good players by bringing this guy in, and because he's appealing to those players. So I don't think it's really only the Raiders, but mainly the Raiders is what gets him on here. And we put an asterisk by Bill Belichick because there's some people that really think he won't be with the Patriots next year. There's been some reports out there. I'm not fully buying into it. I think he could be back, but if he is available, he's going to get hired somewhere, like for sure. Going to get hired somewhere. Could he get traded? Could it be, I don't think it's going to be, we're going to wake up one day and it's going to be like the Patriots fired Bill Belichick. I'm still having a hard time believing that, but if he is available, he will be hired somewhere. So he's a likely candidate. Again, there's an asterisk because if he's available, but I think the Panthers will go after a guy like Ben Johnson again. Could they go after Slowick? What he did with Stroud. Do they want him to do that with Bryce Young? That would be funny, but like intriguing at the same time. He appears more that hype man. If you're looking for a top defensive guy, McDonald and Bill Belichick, everyone will be after him. But I think the team's like going full, like scratch start. Step one of rebuild. Maybe you go with one of the more younger guys over Belichick. But I think for the most part, these guys, like most teams will be, or all will be in on them, but will they be in on those teams? That is the question with these guys. And really just a slight step behind will be these guys, likely candidates. Eric Bieniemy, I think my prediction right when the Commanders hired Bieniemy was at the end of this upcoming year, which is the year we're in, they will fire Ron Rivera and they will promote Eric Bieniemy. That's a pretty good prediction. That is still my prediction, but they could kind of just clean it out and go with somebody else. The offense hasn't been as good while they're on this losing streak right now, but I almost put him on the first tier because that is my prediction, but they could go somewhere else, and other teams could be interested in Eric Bieniemy as well, but yeah, I've heard some stories too that, I don't want to repeat, but, maybe why teams have been hesitant to hire Bieniemy, maybe his character, how he gets along was the most important thing with other coaches, more importantly, but then the players as well. So that's kind of been the issue. People have been kind of wondering why he hasn't been looked at enough or why he gets one interview and that's it. There's some questions about that based off past experiences with past fellow coaches on not his staff, but the same staff. So does he come with some baggage? A whole lot, but maybe not a whole lot, I should say. But then Jim Harbaugh would be under the most likely candidates, but him and Michigan are working towards a deal. But part of that deal that is very important is Michigan wants in there that he's not allowed to entertain NFL coaching offers, and he wants to be able to entertain them. And the hold off here for the last week and a half, 2 weeks, whenever the contract talk started, is maybe he wants an NFL head coaching job, in which Michigan doesn't want him to go. Obviously, they don't want him to leave. So it's a little tricky. I'd probably put him in that top tier and still kind of almost will, since he's kind of holding off on that extension while they're still at a standoff. But it sounded like it most likely he's back at Michigan. I think he wants specific jobs. We've heard him talk very highly of Justin Herbert, so maybe that would be an appealing job. I think it's an appealing job because, Justin Herbert, Derwin James, guys like that, but they're in a bit of a hole. Like, they almost have to go in a rebuild because of the financial situation, and they're bringing a new GM as well, rightfully so. But they almost have to go in a rebuild while you have a guy like Justin Herbert, so how appealing will that be? And then Brian Flores, what he's done with the Vikings defense it has been ridiculous. The Vikings arguably had the worst defense football last year, and they almost took more talent away from that defense in the offseason because they had to cut down on some cap, and they're way better because Brian Flores he's a genius. He's a defensive genius, plain and simple. Nobody's running a defense quite like that. So what he's done is going to be very, very, very appealing to everyone. The problem is, I guess, the baggage he comes with. I don't think there's specifically a problem with Brian Flores. Obviously, there's not a problem with coaching, but with what comes with them, I don't think it's specifically a Brian Flores problem. It's just it's not a problem. It's just what happened in the past kind of brings a lot of attention, the media, the storylines, and maybe there's some teams that will be like, yeah, that doesn't really bother us, if there's extra cameras around us, whatever. But most teams don't really want that. Like, they want their staff and their players to go to work, So that is maybe why he is not on the top tier. Like, he should be on the top tier candidates because how good of a defensive coach? I think he proved it even more this year. With that Vikings defense, and he's got guys that weren't balling. He's got them balling. They really sit down and look at that defense on paper. Danielle Hunter, Harrison Smith, Harrison Phillips. There's other players that can play, but that's really it. Jordan Hicks is currently injured too, so very young corners. What he's done with that group is remarkable. So, in terms of Yeah, that's a different video we can do. Like like the best candidates. I like most talent for a coach. I think Brian Flores would be towards the top, but maybe because what he comes with, I suppose. Maybe just to drop a tier down. And then Dan Quinn is always being interviewed for jobs, and he always ends up going back to the Cowboys. Last year, it felt like, I don't know if he was going to get a job. The year before, it felt like he was going to get a job. It could have been both years, but ends up going back to the Cowboys, and there's been some reports that he's most likely to stay with the Cowboys. And I'm believing that mainly, but for the most part, maybe that's why he's not on the top tier, because otherwise he'd be on that top tier. But at the same time, I do always wonder, like, what if Pete Carroll retires? Dan Quinn goes back to Seahawks, or do they promote Shane Waldron, Clint Hurt? We'll talk about those guys. So that's interesting as well. And maybe there's the job that comes up that's like finally for him, that's like, okay, I gotta take that one. So and teams will be interested. So then Steve Wilks, I mean, 49ers, maybe the best team in football. Is it all because of Steve Wilks? No, but best team in football right now, good coach, good leader. And then what he did at the end there with the Panthers actually might look a little more appealing right now. Like, it's looking like the Panthers should have hired him. So I think teams will look at that and they'll strongly consider him. Good defensive coach. I guess the downside, is he coaching that defense as well as DeMeco Ryans did? No, but it doesn't mean he's doing a bad job. But teams could look at it that way. Then Jeff Ulbrich, the Jets defense's ball and the issues with the offense. I thought he was more likely, like the talk earlier in the year. It's kind of calmed down a little bit right now. But a pretty strong one here. Really good defensive coach. So some other good options. There's not much of a difference between that top tier and this tier. There's like that slight thing, like what they come with, like Flores, Bieniemy, that situation. Slight difference between the two groups there. And then moving on to, and I think these are solid options as well. Like, I think the chances are one of these guys probably gets hired. Brian Callahan, I put at the top purposely. I thought about him with the tier up. Not really a big name. He got a small look last year. Not much going, though. But I think Joe Burrow going down and Jake Browning coming in, and this Bengals offense still looking well coached, explosive. That looks pretty good. I guess the issue is maybe why he's not a tier up is because Zach Taylor does run and call that offense. He does. But Callahan having Taylor, that McVay tree looks really good, and then because O'Connell in Minnesota, and then Callahan being behind Taylor, you're learning from him. Pretty good look. And again, with Burrow out and that offense still balling. They do have weapons everywhere, though, but solid option. Shane Waldron, the offense has been up and down. That's why it's a tricky one with the Seahawks. It's been up and down. I do think it's more so because Geno's been up and down and the offensive line's been beat up. But that's a guy that could get a look. Does Pete Carroll finally retire? I don't think he needs to. I guess I said that like he needed to. I don't think he needs to, but he's up there in age, obviously. He wouldn't really know it, I guess. But, yeah, do they promote? Well, if the Seahawks have a job opening at the head coach position in the sometime in the near future, which I'm not really saying it will happen, but I wonder. Waldron and Dan Quinn. Could they promote Clint Hurt too? Possibility. But Waldron's a guy that I think will get a look. David Shaw, former Stanford coach, kind of waiting for that opportunity, that good opportunity. He got some looks last year. I think the Broncos were kind of interested. I think could get a look. I specifically think about the Raiders, but they could more likely bring back. We'll talk about more about that in a little bit at the end of this video. But yeah, David Shaw could get a look. Mike Kafka, very interesting one, because he actually got more interviews than expected last year. There was some interest, some serious interest for Mike Kafka last year. And it's like, and I guess, I know it was Brian Daboll's offense, but what that Giants offense did, the progression, the sudden improvement from Daniel Jones. That's why I think a big reason why he was getting looked at last year. And then this year starting, Daniel Jones didn't look good. The offense didn't look good. The Giants look like a bottom 3 team in football, and you probably scratch Kafka's name off the list, and maybe people were going, yeah, good thing we didn't hire him. But all of a sudden, they're getting going again. And Tommy DeVito, a guy that's not supposed to be good. He had a god-awful first outing, and for him to be playing well right now, it's a pretty good look for Mike Kafka and company there. So if he had some serious interest last year, could be, again, another young offense coordinator, Dave Canellis from the Bucs. Just going from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. And Baker, you actually could argue he's underrated. he's not the worst quarterback in football, but going from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield, I know Canales wasn't there for that, coming from Seattle's quarterback coach. Something was just flying in my face. But being able to get in there right away, I think they're pretty decent on offense. Not the best in the world, but you like the playbook, you like the style. They mix it up a little bit. So that's a good young option there. If you're looking for an offensive coach, I think maybe he needs to be talked about a little bit more. Raheem Morris got some looks last year. I thought mainly the Colts, but the Rams pretty much got their defense besides Aaron Donald. Like, they get rid of this guy, that guy, Jalen Ramsey, Bobby Wagner. It's really young guys on that defense, not the biggest names. Really, besides Aaron Donald, there's a couple other ones, guys making names for themselves. But Morris is a good defensive coach. That's what that says. That's what that says. So still a solid defense. I mean, not quite as good, but still, because they gutted it basically. So that's a really good look for him. Same thing with Patrick Graham. I always thought he was a good coach. When the Vikings hired Kevin O'Connell, Patrick Graham and Jim Harbaugh were the other options. It eventually came out that Patrick Graham was actually option 2. They chose Kevin O'Connell. Looks like a pretty good choice besides the point. Patrick Graham was their next choice, then Jim Harbaugh. So that's a pretty good look. It was only one team. But I've always liked Patrick Graham. I thought he did a really good job with the Giants. And the Raiders, I thought he's done a pretty decent job, on defense. And they have Max Crosby, one of the best in football, could win Defensive Player of the Year. But other than that, I mean, it's not the best looking group on paper. Like, this linebacker group's playing better. It looks really bad on paper. It's playing much better than expected. So he's getting the most out of his players. He's a good defensive coach. He seems like a really smart guy too. So that's a guy to watch for. I've been a big Patrick Graham fan. So, and then Lou Anarumo, the Bengals. There was a guy that was kind of surprising, like why wasn't he getting looked at more? And he did get looked at here and there, but it never seemed to be serious because he's always had that Bengals defense balling, especially in the playoffs. Now this year happens, and the defense definitely seems like it's taking a step down, especially the run defense. But recently, starting to get going again. Like it's the Bengals they're always a pretty good defense, like more than pretty good. Then you get to the playoffs, and you're sitting there the last couple of years, and you're sitting there saying, is this the best defense? Is this really actually the best defense in football? Not those other teams in the regular season. So, and I think a lot of it in the playoffs is coaching. Like, who has the right game plan? Who's going to throw off the other team's game plan? Who's going to mix it up? Who's going to pull some tricks out of their sleeves, at the right time? And I think that's what he does. And at the right time. That's the key right there. So I think the Bengals are kind of we'll see what happens the rest of the year, but they're starting to get going at the right time, and we'll see if they make the playoffs and what happens. But that's another defensive guy to watch out for. And I'm going to give some way too early predictions. But first, here's some other guys I want to talk about. Brian Johnson, he's been being talked about by others a little bit more than me probably. I think the Eagles still have to prove a little bit. It does feel like they took a step down from Steichen. They probably took a step down more so on the defensive side, losing their coordinator, than they definitely did. But it does feel like a step down, but still could be a good young mind, if you want to hire someone in offense. Frank Smith, learning from Mike McDaniel. I do think a lot of it is McDaniel. Like, Smith seems like a more quiet guy, so I do think he's being talked about a bit. I think he's more of a wild card. Todd Monken, Ravens take a step up. Getting him, so that's a pretty good look. He's got good coaching background, in college and in the NFL. Kellen Moore, I wouldn't recommend it. This isn't one for like me saying like, watch out, like he needs to be like. No, not really that case. The Cowboys were better without him, and the Chargers weren't good. All on him, no, but they look unprepared even specifically on offense. So the reason he's on here is because he got some looks last year, so do teams kind of give him some looks. Jerod Mayo's been a guy that quietly getting some looks. He's an inside linebackers coach right now, but it's like one of those guys like getting some looks. It felt like a guy that's kind of getting ready to be a future head coach, so could it be the time? I think there's more appealing options out there, but could be. Giro Evero, I mean, the Panthers defense playing all right. He's been a good defensive mind wherever he's been. Rams, even though he wasn't leading the way on defense, but then the Broncos and then the Panthers. Then Clint Hurtt, I mean, with the Seahawks going from the god-awful defense to pretty good now, and I think what stands out the most is his development and maybe evaluating talent, because they got some young pieces for his defense, and they've had a solid free agency as well. I think he's obviously in the room having a big say to that because it's his defense. So I think a really good look. That's a really good wild card. The more I'm talking about, the more I'm thinking it's more like a decent possibility. It does feel like a wild card right now. Like, he's not a big name, but evaluation, good looks, and then development, rapidly progressing that defense. Greg Olson's only on here, and there's actually a coach named Greg Olson. He's on the Rams staff currently, but and he was with the Raiders, obviously. He's been around, and he's actually not a bad coach, but he's not going to get a head coaching job. But this is the tight end Greg Olson, and the only reason is because there's been reports that the Panthers would be interested. I think there's got to be way better, more qualified guys to get that job. So I wouldn't really agree with that, but legendary tight end. And then Lincoln Riley, his name gets thrown out there a bit, but he's got it made at USC. In a lot of it's off recruiting. I know he does have a pretty good system, but it's more of a glorified Cliff Kingsbury. Is it going to work in the NFL? I think right away, I think right when you hire him, I think teams would have problems. But I think eventually, it's what the NFL is. Eventually teams get, a bunch of film. They figure it out. Other teams figure it out. That helps other teams. It's just smart guys. Like, eventually, is that style going to work? I think most likely. I know people talk about it like he could go there. I mean, he can go to a team that is in position to draft Caleb Williams early. Sure, I'm not ruling that out. I just think more likely to stay at USC. I think it's a pretty good gig over there, and he's kind of just getting going. It feels like. I know he had better opportunities recently with the talent he had, but I think he's gonna be able to find that talent, and more so the defense's fault, obviously. And then just for fun, we're gonna have better firm predictions, which we usually do pretty good on. But and I threw in 3 teams that have openings. Again, Brandon Staley fired this morning. But I threw in another team that I'm very confident, the Commanders, that will have an opening. Other teams will have an opening. The Bears actually seems a lot less likely now. We'll see what happens there. Battle between the Falcons, Arthur Smith, Todd Bowles, which I think one gets fired, one does not. Saints with Dennis Allen, does he get fired? I think more likely, but these are 4 that we already know, and then one that I think is like 99% chance in the Commanders, Ron Rivera getting fired. But Chargers, I highlight Ben Johnson right now. He did not take a head coaching job last year. I think the Panthers really wanted him. It felt like that from the start. That was my prediction right away. I felt it, and the only thing stopping him was him saying no. And he probably smart to say no. But the Chargers do have to go and rebuild. He's a young coach that can be part of that, and they have Justin Herbert. That is so appealing. I think that works pretty well. There, and Jim Harbaugh made comments about Herbert and like maybe that being an appealing spot. It feels like for Harbaugh, it feels like Michigan, Chargers, maybe Bears if they have an opening. He did play there and pretty appealing with the 2 first-round picks and top pick most likely. But yeah, and then Bill Belichick. Like if Bill Belichick becomes available, I think that's getting a good quarterback again. I think he's not Tom Brady, but trying to find like that good of a quarterback would be big. I think, over these teams, like right now we're just talking about Chargers, Raiders, Panthers, Commanders. I think Bill Belichick would maybe take the year off, maybe overplay. Maybe the Raiders got some weapons, but I think Chargers or Patriots are nothing for Bill Belichick unless there's some surprise opening. Could he go? Saints aren't a surprise opening, but could he go to the Saints? Maybe I could see that. Raiders, I think at this point, I guess we are fresh off that 63-point win, or not 63-point win, 63-point outing for the Raiders. But Antonio Pierce, the players love him. He's a good motivator. Right now it's hard to see them not go Antonio Pierce. David Shaw is a guy to look out for there. Former Stanford coach, guy to look out for. But I guess it really depends on if Pierce, how he finishes the rest of this year. The Panthers, and they would really like Ben Johnson. I don't think Ben Johnson's going to the Panthers. Maybe with Bryce Young there, now maybe it's appealing you develop him. I look at Bobby Slowick. I mean, what he's done with C.J. Stroud, they go, we'll bring him over here. We'll see if he can do the same thing with Bryce Young. Then Mike McDonald, if they want to go the defensive route, they're going to go with the young route as well. In the Commanders, my prediction a year ago was that they fire Rivera and they promote Bieniemy. So I'm going to stick with that. There's definitely a possibility they go with like a younger guy as well because they're probably about to go. They are going to rebuild. They traded their pass rushers. It was obvious then. So Ben Johnson, which it kind of like it gives me like Lions vibes, with the running back duo like Brian Robinson, and that can open up the pass. And whether it's Howell or finding the quarterback in the future, they have a pretty high draft pick, so that could be appealing to Ben Johnson. And I put Bobby Slowick there as well because I think they can. I'm guarding them. I'm blocking them there. I think they could be looking to run that offense is this similar offense like the 49ers background where he came from 2 years ago. So again, if the Bears fire Eberflus, Jim Harbaugh could be number one, but he may not leave to go there. I'm trying to think. There's been reports about Eric Bieniemy. I think they would rather keep Eberflus. Honestly, Bill Belichick, if they got some pretty appealing draft picks, you never know. The Saints, they would be interested in Belichick. They would be interested. I think if they were to fire Dennis Allen, they'd be taking a hit on defense. And I think that wouldn't be to go defense. It would be to go, let's get this offense going. Like, if they fired Dennis Allen like a defensive guy, I'd be very confused. That would be confusing to me. Besides Bill Belichick, he is a defensive guy, but that's different. That's like, guy that can turn the whole organization around, more than just a defensive guy. So we'll make an exception there, I guess. Good thing I caught myself on that one. But anybody, that wouldn't make any sense. Like if Mike McDonald, good coach, should be a good coach, but that just wouldn't make sense. So I would think most likely for them would be offense. Get that offense going. Maybe they are forcing Derek Carr to for him to work out, get going, or if they have a decent draft pick, draft a quarterback. But so I look at Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick. Could they go Bieniemy? I don't think they would go Bieniemy. Just a kind of a feeling. I look at Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick. Then you could look at the Brian Callahan, Shane Waldron's. More I was talking about those guys. More I think it's possibility. I look at Panthers and Commanders, Saints for guys like that, like Brian Callahan, Shane Waldron, got offensive guys like that. Canellis from the Bucks, that could be one. I think Waldron, maybe a little more Seahawks backgrounds, and more likely that way, possibly. So we'll see. We'll talk more about this when the time's right. We'll have a Black Monday, coming up at the end of the season where more coaches get fired. Maybe it doesn't happen right away, but we're always giving predictions on Twitter for this and keeping you guys up to date with news and who's interviewing who. We got a tracker going sometimes, so we'll have you guys covered for everything NFL, every single thing NFL. We got you guys. So join us, check out our content. You won't be disappointed. Check us out on Twitter. Links pinned in the comments for anything you're looking for, social media and sponsors. But that is going to do it for this one. Thanks everyone for watching. Goodbye.